You've tried to quit, and failed. Several times. You promised yourself it would be the last. But before you knew it, you'd already relapsed again. I know what it's like. I've been there. Pornography takes over you, drains you, weakens you from the inside. And every fall makes you believe you're too weak to win. But what if I told you there is a practical method, direct and real, that made me go through 90 days without a single relapse? It wasn't magic. It wasn't forced abstinence. It was awareness, it was transformation. And today I'm going to show you, step by step, how I got out of rock bottom and reclaimed my masculine power, mental, spiritual, and even sexual. If you are tired of living falling, if you really want to get up, stay with me until the end, because this video could be the beginning of your new life. The journey begins at absolute zero. At first, I was just another man drowning in a cycle of self-sabotage. With each relapse, my energy drained away like water through my fingers. My confused mind, low motivation, and weakened body made me believe there was no way out. But there was an inner voice that insisted, "You weren't born to live like this." It was in this tension between pain and calling that I took the first step. Without understanding much, but with a clear instinct, I needed to get away from masturbation. It was then that I learned about the concept of semen retention. At first, it seemed like just another internet theory. But there was something there that resonated differently. I began to investigate, not in a hurry, but carefully. I discovered that this practice had ancient roots and transformed men into spiritual, physical, and mental leaders. Something that modern society wants to hide at all costs. And the more I delved into it, the more sense it all made. The big turning point came when I stopped just looking for avoid relapse, and I started to focus on create a new identity. This required much more than willpower. It required strategy, self-knowledge, and discipline. I began to study patterns, recognize triggers, understand the anatomy of desire and how it tricked my mind. Everything became clear. The enemy was not out there, but inside me, camouflaged in unconscious habits. I made a full commitment. Either I changed or I sank. And that decision was my rebirth. I deleted everything that weakened me, videos, social media, toxic conversations. I created an environment that helped me win, not sabotaged me. I learned that semen retention is not about repression, but about redirection. Transmuting desire into action, into purpose, into construction. This foundation was essential for the next 90 days. If I had tried to go the brute force route, I would have failed again. But there, in that fertile soil, a new version of myself began to be born. And that was just the beginning. The 4 pillars method: routine, breathing, purpose, and mental shielding. What got me to 90 days without relapse wasn't willpower. It was method. And that method was born out of pain and observation. I realized that the days I resisted temptation the most were the days I followed a solid routine. Waking up early, exercising, eating clean, keeping my body moving. When you live on autopilot, desire takes over. When you live with intention, you take over desire. Routine became my shield. The second pillar was the conscious breathing. This seems too simple, but it's what saved me several times. Every time a strong urge came, I would stop everything and breathe. 30 deep, diaphragmatic breaths. This changed my mental frequency, balanced my energy, and gave the urge time to pass. I understood that semen retention requires control of the body, but mainly of the mind. And breathing is the link between the two. The third pillar was purpose. While I was just trying to fall, I was still weak. But when I set clear goals, to build a project, change my life, help others, something inside me woke up. Semen became a fuel, not a burden. Every time I felt the urge, I would transmute it into action. I would record a video, write, study, do something that would bring me closer to my mission. Purpose is the antidote to lust. The 4th pillar was the mental shielding. I began to understand how the system works against us. Sensual images, memes, music, everything is designed to steal your energy. So I became radical. I started to filter everything. What I saw, who I talked to, what I listened to. I exchanged my cell phone for reading, my feed for nature, distraction for introspection. You can't overcome an addiction by living in the environment that strengthens it. These 4 pillars, routine, breathing, purpose, and mental armor, created the solid foundation that sustained my 90 days. And when you build that foundation, you don't have to struggle as much anymore. Desire starts to fade, and your spirit starts to take over. How I reprogrammed my pleasure. Transmutation in action. One of the biggest secrets I discovered in Semen Retentiones that pleasure doesn't need to be erased, it needs to be redirected. As I tried to suppress my desires, they came back stronger, like a compressed spring. But the day I decided to stop fighting them and started to transform that fire into creative action, everything changed. I discovered that within desire lies the power of fulfillment, if you know how to channel it. If you are a man looking for more energy, focus, and self-control, I have prepared a powerful ebook that will show you how semen retention can transform your life. Link in the first pinned comment. I started small. Every time I felt like it, instead of giving in, I would create something. I would write, record a video, train hard. And this generated another kind of pleasure, a deeper, more satisfying pleasure. The pleasure of growing, of being in control. And the more I repeated this, the more my mind associated desire with production, not addiction. Dopamine started to come from building, not from empty discharge. This process is called sexual transmutation. I took what used to bring me down and turned it into fuel to get up. I used the energy of libido as a driving force to expand my consciousness. It's like an internal alchemy. Raw energy turns into gold, but only if you know how to operate with discipline and intention. The key is to act immediately when the impulse appears, before it dominates you. Little by little, I realized that my libido hadn't disappeared, it had become more intelligent. I began to attract more female attention, to have more confidence, more magnetism. But now, I wasn't a slave to it. The energy that had previously sought immediate pleasure was now building a legacy. When you understand the value of semen, you no longer waste it for momentary pleasure. You value your life as something sacred. Reprogramming pleasure is one of the greatest liberations of the journey. You move out of animal, instinctual mode and into creative mode. This is when the ordinary man becomes a conscious man. And the whole of life responds to this with respect, opportunity, and inner power. The triggers that almost took me down, and how I escaped them. During the 90-day journey, I learned that triggers don't come with a warning. They infiltrate your daily life disguised as innocent distractions. A sensual story, a memory from the past, a random conversation. All of these can turn into a pit. And if you're not careful, you'll fall into it without realizing it. Semen retention requires constant vigilance. It is not about living in fear, but about living with presence and strategy. The first trigger that affected me was the boredom. Days without purpose, without goals, were an invitation to relapse. I discovered that an empty mind really is a workshop of desires. So I learned to plan my days. Always with something in the works, no matter how small. When your schedule is full of things that feed your soul, addiction has no room to grow. Constant action is a form of mental armor. Another strong trigger was the emotional loneliness. That feeling that something is missing, of wanting to fill a void. And addiction takes advantage of this, offering quick pleasure to alleviate the pain. But it is a trap. When I realized this, I began to work on solitude with quality. Meditation, writing, prayer. Filling the void with presence and spiritual connection, not with artificial stimuli. This strengthened my emotional foundation. I also struggled with visual and auditory triggers, music, images, movies. Often, all it took was hearing a beat or seeing a provocative image to trigger a cascade of impulses. So I started using content blockers. I chose what to consume carefully and created a positive bubble. Not to live in isolation, but to preserve my focus and energy. My environment needed to reflect my decision. Eventually, I realized that triggers aren't enemies, they're tests. And each time you overcome one, you become stronger. Each day you choose yourself over the discharge, you rebuild yourself. Learning to recognize triggers and respond consciously is what saved me from falling into the invisible traps of the old me. What happened to my body, mind, and spirit in 90 days? Upon completing 90 days of semen retention, I realized that I was no longer the same man. My body underwent a regeneration. My vitality increased visibly. Firmer muscles, naturally glowing skin, and a more intense look. What was once constant fatigue became concentrated energy. And the most impressive thing is that it wasn't just physical, it was vibrational. My presence began to impact the surroundings. My mind, which had been agitated and scattered, gained focus and clarity. The mental fog that had been with me disappeared. Ideas flowed more clearly. Procrastination lost its power. I could sit, focus, and produce for hours. It was as if I had hacked my internal system. Without the hormonal fluctuations caused by masturbation, my brain operated in a high-performance state. I began to see what had previously been hidden. What I'm explaining here is much more detailed in my ebook The Power of Semen Retention. There is a simple step-by-step guide for you to apply in your daily life. It is very worthwhile. But the most sacred thing was the spiritual impact. I felt more connected to myself, to God, to existence. Intuition sharpened. The signs began to appear more frequently. Revealing dreams, synchronized encounters, messages coming from silence. It seemed like the universe was responding to my decision to remain pure. The semen retention it is not just discipline, it is a form of consecration of one's own vital energy. The feeling of being in control of my inner strength brought me profound peace. I was no longer a slave to my impulses. I was free. And this freedom was reflected in my relationships, in the way I expressed myself, even in the way I walked. It's hard to explain in words, but it's like you're wearing a new soul. A more aligned, stronger, truer version of yourself. These 90 days were living proof that the body is the temple, the mind is the tool, and the spirit is the commander. When you retain, you elevate. When you master, you create. And when you surrender to your own truth, life transforms from the inside out. The Day 91 Trap. Why many people relapse after success. After reaching 90 days off semen retention, many men fall into the most treacherous trap of all, the illusion of control. They think they are protected, that they can relax, that this, just once, won't affect them. But this is the whisper of the ego, disguised as self-confidence. I almost fell for it. Day 91 is dangerous because it brings a new test, that of spiritual vanity. Those who think they have won are already stumbling. In my case, I felt the urge to reward myself. After all, he had beaten the addiction for 3 months. I started thinking about taking a break. And I realized that this voice was the same one that had brought me down in the past. Only now, more subtle. It's like the old me comes back with a new mask. Fortunately, I stopped and reflected. I didn't come this far to go back to square one. And I understood that true retention is not a phase, it's a lifestyle. The problem is that most people don't prepare for post-success. They think that winning means reaching 90 days, but in reality, that's when the real journey begins. Because now you have more energy, more visibility, more power. And if you don't have a structure, all of this becomes a trap. Many are tested exactly when they are at their strongest. That's why humility and vigilance are the secrets to constancy. So I decided to create new milestones. I no longer looked at the number of days, but rather at the quality of my energy. The question became, am I living in alignment with my purpose today? This kept me in the present, freed me from anxiety, and prevented me from falling into the temptation of counting days like trophies. The ego loves numbers, but the spirit seeks truth. I learned that true mastery has no end, it is cultivated every day. Therefore, if you have achieved a victory, celebrate it. But do so soberly. Because the real downfall does not happen through error, but through the loss of vigilance. And semen retention, when done consciously, becomes more than a challenge. It becomes a sacred path of continuous transformation. How to deal with built-up energy without freaking out or repressing it. Along the semen retention, many people make a dangerous mistake. They try to plug the volcano without redirecting the lava. The accumulated energy begins to bubble, rise, press, and if you don't learn to channel it, it explodes in the form of irritation, insomnia, compulsion, or relapse. The secret is not to repress the desire, but transform this energy into creative power and conscious action. The first thing I learned was to move my body every day. Without exception. Weight training, running, pranayama, anything that would make the energy circulate. Because retained semen is like dammed water. If it doesn't flow, it rots. And if you don't use this force, it turns against you. That's why my workouts became intense, with total focus. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was alchemy, sweat instead of discharge. The second step was to work on the canal mental. Daily meditation, deep reading, and inner silence. My mind needed focus, it needed spiritual nourishment. I began to immerse myself in content that expanded my consciousness. I felt that, as I elevated my thoughts, my sexual energy began to rise as well, from instinct to intuition. Excitement turned into clarity and peace. It was like climbing a mountain from within. I also learned to express this energy in the world. Projects, videos, texts, ideas. The energy that previously sought pleasure became productivity. And the most incredible thing, this generated a much greater and more lasting pleasure. A clean, conscious, full pleasure. You begin to understand that sexual energy is the raw material of your personal creation. And when you understand that, you never want to waste it again. Don't put it off. Click on the first pinned comment, buy the ebook, and start changing your energy, your mind, and your life today. Finally, I recognized that, yes, there would be intense days. Days when the desire came strong. But I learned to welcome it without identifying with it. This energy is mine, but I am greater than it. And with breathing, movement, and intention, I put it to work for my mission. That's when the magic happens. When you master yourself, the whole world begins to transform before your eyes. What I stopped doing so I would never relapse again. One of the biggest mistakes I made at the beginning of my journey was trying to keep semen retention without changing the rest of my life. And every time I tried to win by force, I would fall back. Until I understood, it's not just what you do, it's also what you stop doing. True strength comes from subtraction. That's when I started removing habits, stimuli, and attitudes that kept me stuck on the same frequency. The first thing I cut was unrestricted access to social media. Because there, every mistake started with a click. All it took was a video, an image, a profile, and the cycle started again. I deleted apps, installed blockers, and used my cell phone at set times. I replaced the feed with reading. I replaced scrolling with notes about my goals. The energy I spent browsing, I started to save and transform. Then I stopped sleeping late. Nighttime, when misused, is the territory of addictions. When the world sleeps and you are alone, your worst self wakes up. I started respecting my sleep, going to bed earlier, waking up with the sun. And that made an immediate difference. My body became more balanced, my mind more centered, and my desire lost strength. Sleeping well is an invisible weapon that few use, but it shields the mind from relapses. Another thing I've abandoned is the idea of testing limits. Before, I used to think, I'll just watch a little bit, I'll just look at a picture. But every beginning has an end. You can't play with fire and get away with it. So I stopped fooling myself. There's no middle ground with pornography. Either you nip it in the bud or it takes over again. And when I stopped justifying small permissions, I started to see real results. Finally, I stopped hanging out with people who made fun of my process. People who made jokes, who didn't respect my change, who encouraged relapses. I traded that for environments that raised my standards. It's not radicalism, it's self-love. That semen retention showed me that sometimes you have to disappoint others so you don't continue to disappoint yourself. How I became immune to pornography, even when it was haunting me. For a long time, pornography felt like a ghost that silently followed me around. Even when I decided to stop, it would find a way to come back, an ad, a thought, a memory. It seemed like it was everywhere. Until I realized, the problem wasn't the pornography itself, but the space I left inside me for her to live. And from the moment I emptied that space, it lost power. The first step was detoxify completely. It wasn't enough to just not watch, I needed to clear my mind. For weeks, I wrote down triggers, thoughts, feelings that came before the urge. I noticed patterns. I discovered that the urge came when I was bored, needy, anxious. So instead of focusing on not watching, I focused on resolve the emotional roots. That was revolutionary. Another factor was changing the relationship with the feminine. Before, I saw women as objects of pleasure. This was taught to me by pornography. But when I began to see them as expressions of the divine, as mirrors of healing and learning, my mind was purified. The desire remained, but now it was respectful, conscious, sacred. This change in vision dissolved the addiction completely. But the most important thing was to create a life I didn't want to escape. Projects, goals, purpose. When your life is small, you need escape. When your life is grand, you don't have time for junk. I was so busy building, serving, evolving, that pornography became irrelevant. Sexual energy found a destination. And a desire with direction doesn't become an addiction, it becomes strength. Today, I can say with conviction, I am immune not because I am strong, but because I transformed my identity. I no longer see myself as someone struggling with addiction. I see myself as a man who honors his energy, who respects his own temple, and who is here to build something greater. And when you transform yourself from within, what haunted you simply disappears. The impact of retention on my love and sex life. One of the most striking surprises of the semen retention was realizing how she completely changed the way I related to the feminine. Before, my relationships were based on desire, need, and attachment. I confused attraction with love and pleasure with connection. But as I mastered my energy, I began to see women in a different light. No longer as a source of pleasure, but as a mirror of my own energy. The first impact was on presence. When you hold back, your energy builds up and your presence expands. You don't have to say anything, women feel it. Your gaze changes, your posture changes, your vibe speaks for you. I started to attract attention without trying, just by being there. And the most interesting thing, I started to be more selective. Before, any female attention was already a cause for euphoria. Later, I started to choose more consciously. There was also a profound change in true intimacy. Without the anxiety of performance, without the urgency of pleasure, I began to experience much more intense and spiritual moments with my partner. The touch, the look, the silence, everything became more profound. The connection was not only physical, it was energetic. Sex stopped being a release and became a communion. A fusion of souls, where semen was not ejaculated, but transmuted into a real connection. Retention also gave me emotional clarity. In the past, I would get into toxic relationships out of fear of loneliness. But now, because I am complete in myself, I no longer look for anyone to fulfill me. This has given me freedom. I have learned to love without holding back, to open up without nullifying myself. And this has raised the level of bonds. Well-directed sexual energy attracts partners with the same frequency, conscious, deep, and aligned. Finally, I realized that a true man attracts not by his looks or his money, but by his energy field. And this field is shaped by the way he takes care of his own life force. When you hold on, you become whole. And only those who are whole can truly unite with someone. Semen retention healed my way of loving, and that is worth more than any fleeting pleasure. The legacy of retention. How it changed me forever. A semen retention, it started as a 90-day challenge, but it became a turning point in my life. What seemed like just an effort to avoid relapses became a portal of self-knowledge, reconstruction, and rebirth. Today, I understand that it was not about holding back, but about recognize who I am without vices, without masks, without escape. That is the true power that the journey reveals. The greatest gift retention gave me was inner sovereignty. Before, my impulses ruled me. Now, I rule my impulses. This has freed me. It has shown me that the true leader is the one who rules himself. And when you rule your inner world, the outer world begins to respect you. Doors open, opportunities arrive, and your vibration attracts everything that is aligned with your purpose. The practice also brought me a living and concrete spirituality. Not something theoretical or religious, but a real connection with the divine that lives within me. I learned that semen is the particle of creation, the breath of life, the spark of the spirit in the body. And when you honor this, the universe responds. Life stops being about survival and becomes an expression of your highest essence. Today, everything I do bears the mark of this journey. My projects, my relationships, my choices. Retention has transformed me on the inside, and this is reflected on everything outside. I feel more energy, more clarity, more magnetism, more peace. And, above all, I feel like I am living with purpose. I am no longer lost in pleasure, I am present on the path. That's the legacy. The certainty that I'm not the same anymore. And that once you wake up, there's no going back to sleep. Semen retention taught me that inside every man there is a sleeping king. And when that king wakes up, the whole world changes. Because a man in control of his own energy is a man who came to leave his mark. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you is asking for change. And I tell you with complete clarity, you have everything you need to win. Semen retention isn't just about stopping the leak, it's about being reborn as a complete man. It doesn't matter how many times you've failed before. What matters is what you're going to do from now on. Remember this, no one takes your energy away from you, you are the one who delivers. And when you decide to stop giving in to pornography, distractions, and impulses, you begin to build something much greater than pleasure. You begin to build power. A silent, magnetic, transformative power. And it will take you to a new level in all areas of your life. That's what happened to me, and it can happen to you. But you don't have to walk alone. I transformed everything I experienced, learned and applied in these 90 days into a clear, direct, accessible method, and I put it into my exclusive ebook on semen retention. There you will find the pillars, strategies, exercises, and tools that will keep you going on your journey, even when no one is looking. Backhand index pointing right, click on the link pinned in the comments or description and secure your copy now. A quick read, straight to the point and made for those who want real change. If you feel that this is the time, don't put it off. Because your energy is worth more than any passing pleasure. Retain. Transmute. Build. Turn the key today.